The Jets are in Buffalo this weekend for a game against the Bills. Only 2 games remain in the 2024 season, and this one could come down to simple motivation. Let's discuss today on Locked On Jets.
You are Locked On Jets, your daily New York Jets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome. This is the Locked On Jets podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. It's Friday, December 27th, 2024, and I'm your host, John B. from ganggreennation.com, wishing you a very happy holiday season, and thank you so much for making the show your first listen or first watch every day. Big shout out to you everydayers. This is a daily podcast covering the New York Jets with new episodes each day through the week, Monday through Friday, and today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Well, the Jets are in Buffalo this weekend. It's their annual trip up to Orchard Park, New York, for a game against the Bills. Kickoff time scheduled for 1 p.m. Eastern on Sunday. The game will be shown on CBS. And I think motivation is a key word for this game because both teams enter with some questions about their motivation. Now, for the Jets, I think it's rather obvious why this is being questioned. This is a professional football team. You do expect these guys to go out and play hard and compete to win every single week. And the Jets, for as much as the season's been miserable, more often than not, have played competitive football. They have not been completely blown out all that often in 2024. And that's an expectation. That's not praise. I mean, sometimes a team goes out and you see, sometimes the team's in a lost season and they play competitive football. People go, oh, they're still playing hard. That's the expectation. You expect a professional football team to play hard. They're professionals. That's what their job is to do. So I don't think you deserve any extra praise for playing hard. But Jets have been competitive through much of the season. It doesn't really mean a whole lot as far as whether the season was a success or not, because this season was an enormous failure. Now we're getting close to the end of the season, though, and especially like those last 2 weeks when your team's finished, when you've been out of the playoff race for a long time, when the season's just dragged on. And when the coaching staff isn't coming back, this is the point where it can be easy to kind of just look ahead to the offseason. These next 2 weeks sometimes turn into what are known as U-Haul games, where a player may not live in the city where he plays, so he's loaded up all the stuff in the U-Haul and is ready to drive out because he's just ready for the season to end. I think that's an open question right now with the New York Jets, and there have even been some insinuations this week. I mean, Aaron Rodgers alluded to it in passing. It's a question, which Jets team is going to show up? Is this going to be a Jets team that's going to show up and compete to win and be completely focused on the game? Or is it a team that's got a bit of an eye towards the offseason? We're past the point now where, where there's much time left. There's really not much time left in the season. There's this week and the next week a home game against Miami. How competitive will this Jets team be in a season which has gone terribly for them? A season where they've had their hearts broken week after week, losing all these close games, and a season, again, where we know that many of the key people will not be back. The head coach has already been fired. The interim head coach is not getting the job. Most of the coaching staff is leaving. The general manager has been fired. It feels very unlikely that the interim general manager, Phil Savage, is getting the job. I know it's easy to say that, and I say this a lot myself, that a player's film is their resume, and you have to go out there and play hard every week. But once you get to the last week or two of the season, it's not clear how much of a difference 1 or 2 games is going to make as far as your value goes across the league. And this is the type of week where it's easy, not just in the game, but it's easy to maybe not put the work in practice. It's easy to kind of not focus when you're preparing for the game. And that can end up having an impact on the final outcome. Is this a Jets team that's going to be focused on playing spoiler against a very good Bills team? Is this going to be a Jets team focused on avenging the Week 6 loss on Monday Night Football, the game that was really in many ways the no turning back point for this team, because that was the loss that dropped the Jets to 2-4 on the season. And that was the point where it was really difficult to see this team turning things around. Or will this be a team focused more on just getting the last 2 games done and getting to the offseason? And we've started to see it over the last couple of weeks. Injuries are starting to pile up, and I'm not going to criticize anybody for sitting out because I think the Jets are smart. If any key player, if any player part of this team's foundation going forward is not 100%, it really doesn't make sense to put them on the field at this point. Last week, Quinnen Williams sat out with an injury. He's a key player for this team going forward. It's not clear who's going to be out this week. Another aspect of this is just the team is going to start stashing players on IR over the next 2 weeks for a very simple reason. At the end of the season, the practice squad ceases to exist. So anybody on the practice squad immediately becomes a free agent after the season ends. If they're on the active roster, though, they do not immediately become a free agent. The Jets retain their rights. So if you place a player on IR, you can call somebody up from the practice squad and keep their rights near the end of the season. So that could play a factor in who plays in this game. So if how competitive will the Jets be? I think that's question number one in this game. On the other side, there are some questions about Buffalo's motivation. And I don't think that these questions are necessarily very well founded. Now, I think the questions for Buffalo's motivations come from the fact that the Kansas City Chiefs won over Pittsburgh on Christmas Day. And that victory guarantees the Chiefs the 1 seed and the 1 first-round bye that exists in the AFC. So a lot of people have looked at this game and said, well, Buffalo's motivation is not going to be that high. I don't know that that's true. And the reason I don't think that that's true is what happened the second game Christmas Day, where the Baltimore Ravens beat the Houston Texans. And that is significant because that kept the Baltimore Ravens alive in the quest for the 2 seed. Buffalo can clinch the 2 seed with a win over the Jets on Sunday. And the 2 seed is important. Now, back in the days where there were only 6 teams that made the playoffs in each conference, the 2 seed was highly coveted because there were 2 first-round byes. So it was the second ticket to the divisional round without needing to play wild card weekend. But the 2 seed still has significance because it guarantees you a second home game. If you win in the wild card round, it guarantees you that you will get a home game in the divisional round. And at the top of the AFC this year, there are lots of elite teams. You'd much rather be at home than on the road. Now, Buffalo's magic number is 1. They win the 2 seed with either a win this weekend against the Jets or a win next weekend in Foxborough against the Patriots, or if Baltimore loses next weekend. But if Buffalo wins this game, they clinch the 2 seed. And that means next week they can essentially treat as a bye week. They can essentially get themselves ready for the wild card round of the playoffs. They can play all their backups next week. Guys who are banged up can sit against New England. They won't need to play. They can just rest up and heal themselves. They don't need to risk any of their starters for injuries. And they can also, as far as game planning goes, they can start to focus on the playoffs. They don't need to focus on the New England Patriots. If Buffalo loses this game, they're going to have to play next weekend because that 2 seed matters. You want to be at home in the divisional round. So I actually think Buffalo's motivation is going to be high. Now, is it possible that the Bills are a little bummed out because now they know the 1 seed's off the table? Of course it is. Is it possible maybe the Bills are looking forward to the playoffs right now? Maybe they think the Jets aren't much competition. They might be right about that. But as we've seen across the league for years and years and years, even a bad team has a good Sunday sometimes. And sometimes a dominant team, they don't respect their opponent. They look past their opponent. And that's where surprises come from. Could that happen? I kind of doubt it with so much on the line for Buffalo, but I guess it's possible. So 2 teams having 2 very different types of seasons. The Jets falling short of all expectations. The Bills meeting and perhaps even surpassing expectations because, while I don't think anybody thought Buffalo was going to fall to the bottom of the league this year, I think most people thought they were a playoff team. The general perception was that the Bills would take maybe half a step back this year because of all the key players they jettisoned in the offseason. Instead, Buffalo's right at the top of the AFC. They're on the verge of clinching the 2 seed, and they are the only team that's beaten the 1 seed, the Kansas City Chiefs. The Chiefs only have 1 loss this season. It was to Buffalo. Can the Bills finish off the Jets and get the 2 seed? That's the question this weekend. My guess is their motivation is going to be high, but there are always other possibilities. Now, you're on the Locked On Jets podcast. We'll talk about the number 1 challenge with the Buffalo Bills when you face them, and it's really no surprise. Buffalo has one of the top quarterbacks in the league, and he's playing his best football this season. This is probably the best season of Josh Allen's career. We'll talk about why that is and the challenges this present the Jets as we continue here on this Friday game preview edition of Locked On Jets. Today's episode of Locked On Jets is brought to you by Game Time. Game Time is focused on togetherness this holiday season. That means when you bring people together at live events, the experience is that much better, and it's the perfect gift. And Game Time now has a feature called Game Time Picks that makes getting tickets for live events even easier. Game Time Picks filters out the fluff to show you only incredible deals on great seats, so you don't have to waste time searching through thousands of tickets. I know it's been a bad season for the Jets, but I gotta be honest, I've gone to Jets games in December and January in bad seasons before. It can be a fun experience. The pressure is off. The Jets, you don't really have to worry about whether the Jets win or lose if the season's over at that point. I still have fun going to games. So maybe you're in Buffalo this weekend, or maybe you want to go next week against the Dolphins when the Jets play their home finale. Well, Game Time's the place to get in on the action. I've used Game Time myself. It's really easy to use, just a couple taps, and you've got amazing deals. And they have all in pricing, so no hidden fees. You know exactly what you're paying when you check out. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONNFL, LOCKEDONNFL, one word with no space, for $20 off. Download Game Time today. What time is it? Game time. Thank you so much for making Locked On Jets your first listen or first watch every day. Big shout out to you every day. This is a daily podcast covering the New York Jets with new episodes each day through the week, Monday through Friday. This weekend, the Jets are in Buffalo. They take on the division rival Buffalo Bills. I think when the schedule came out, a lot of Jets fans had this game circled on the calendar. I know I did. We all thought that maybe this was a game that could decide the AFC East. Maybe it was a game that would decide playoff seeding. Well, it's not going to decide the AFC East. The AFC East was decided months ago when the Bills have completely run away with the division. It could help determine playoff seeding, though, for the Buffalo Bills, who are having a fantastic season. A season, I don't want to say nobody saw it coming, because, again, I don't think anybody thought the Bills were going to fall to the bottom of the league. This was clearly a playoff team. This was clearly a team that, if things fell into place, could have a big season. But I think a lot of us thought they'd maybe take a half step back. This was kind of like a reset year for the Bills as far as their salary cap goes. And they also made a big trade this offseason. They sent their number one receiver, Stephon Diggs, to the Houston Texans. And that had kind of been building. Last year, there were signs of maybe discontent in the locker room with Diggs. And at the time the deal was made, a big part of me thought, okay, maybe the Bills aren't going to be quite as good this year. But another part of me thought, maybe that's the right move for them. Maybe that's a move that is, sometimes in football, it's not all about talent. It's not always about collecting the big names. The Jets are a perfect example of that. Chemistry also plays a role. And when I saw that deal, and I saw how little the Bills got in return, because Stephon Diggs, legitimate number one receiver, has been one of the top receivers in the league the last, or at least had been one of the top receivers in the league since he was acquired in a trade by Buffalo from Minnesota back in 2020. Sometimes moves are really about chemistry. And I wondered, like, after all the discontent with Diggs over the last couple of years, maybe it was a chemistry move. Maybe it's the type of thing that can improve your football team. And I think by most accounts, that's been the case. Yesterday on our crossover show, I chatted with Joe Marino, and Joe talked about how this offense may not be more talented, but it's better now. And in some ways, a guy like Diggs, who's a great receiver, but one who demands the ball, one who you have to make sure gets his share of targets. Sometimes a guy like that can hold the offense back a little bit. It's crazy to say with a receiver that talented, but if you have a guy who's constantly telling you he needs targets, it comes at the expense of other guys. And now the Bills run an offense where, look, they still have good players. I mean, I think a lot of these skill guys in Buffalo are quality players, but they don't really have that go-to guy anymore. They don't really need a go-to guy at this point with Josh Allen, because Josh Allen's kind of taken the next step. You're early in Josh Allen's career. He was a very up and down quarterback. The Bills went to the playoffs in 2019. I thought that Allen was not really a driving force behind that team. Then in 2020, they got Diggs. And Allen, you saw the improvement in Allen. Allen took a big leap in 2020. And really ever since that point, he's been one of the best quarterbacks in the NFL. And maybe he needed that number one receiver to take him to the next level. Well, now he's matured to a point, and this happens in the NFL. I think sometimes we forget that, quarterbacks, there's a growing process for quarterbacks. Maybe we forget it because with the Jets, our quarterbacks never grow until they go to another team. But you start out, and maybe you're not the reason your team wins, but you're good enough that your team doesn't lose because of you. And then you take that next step and you get that big receiver. That receiver helps move you forward. And then you get to a point where maybe that receiver is kind of like training wheels riding a bike. And you don't really need him anymore. And now Josh Allen can scan the whole field. He can find the open guy and hit him. And that's what Allen's been doing all season long. And when you add Josh Allen's physical tools to the way, all of those other aspects, processing, reading a defense, you have a quarterback who's very, very difficult to defend. And there really are no easy answers for the Jets because, again, a week 17 game, who's going to be on the field. The Jets are probably going to hold out anybody who's a key player who's been nursing an injury. Again, Quinnen Williams, I was a little surprised last weekend when Quinnen Williams didn't end up playing, but looking back on it, I guess it makes sense because you don't want anybody to suffer. If anybody's banged up, you don't want them to suffer a more serious injury heading into the offseason and forcing them to spend their offseason rehabbing. Against the Los Angeles Rams last week, the Jets came out with a very vanilla game plan. In fact, I thought both teams played very, very vanilla games on both sides of the ball. And that's why you saw all these long sustained drives and no big plays. The defenses were all essentially just like sitting back trying to avoid the big play. They were willing to give up plays underneath. And I'm guessing that's going to be the strategy for the Jets this weekend against Buffalo. I don't know if it's going to work for the Jets as well as it worked against the Rams. And I don't think the defense, despite only the Rams only scoring 19 points, I don't think the defense played a great game in that one. But I think the Jets defensive game plan last week when they were undermanned was essentially force the Rams to drive the entire field. Don't give them anything easy. Don't give them any big plays. And then hope somebody makes a big play in the red zone or hope the Rams mess up in the red zone. And, of course, the Jets lost. And their offense played a role in that. But against Josh Allen, that's a really tough thing to ask because Josh Allen is a quarterback who can execute at a really high level. I think I think the Jets are going to be in a lot of bend but don't break mode this weekend. It's going to be tough, though. And one thing the Jets need to make sure they do, which is something that they haven't really done all that well this season against mobile quarterbacks. You have to be controlled in your pass rush. You have to be disciplined when you're getting up the field. You have to stay in your lanes because the second you run past Josh Allen, an edge rusher who gets himself too far up the field and gives Allen one of those lanes to break left or break right, you're going to be in trouble because Allen, at that point, Allen's going to look down the field. And if a defender in coverage comes off and try and tackle Allen, Allen's just going to throw the ball over his head. And the defender doesn't, Allen's going to tuck in and run. And Allen this year, there's been a lot of talk, a lot made of that, he's picking his spots a little bit better than he has in the past. In the past, he was very quick to run. This year, he's not quite as quick. He'll do it when he needs to. He still can produce, but maybe he's being a little bit more judicious in it at the points where he does it. But it's still there. And in that first game, Allen hurt the Jets with some scrambles week 6 when the Jets were very undisciplined. Jets need to play better defense. And the other issue with the Jets is the run defense, which has been inconsistent all season long. And Buffalo ran all over them in that first meeting, including that first drive where the Bills essentially just ran the ball nonstop and put the ball in the end zone. This is not going to be an easy task for the Jets. I can't help but think back to last year. In week 1, of course, the Jets shocked the Bills in an overtime game. Jets defense played great. Their second meeting later in the season in Orchard Park, Jets defense got lit up. And this time, the Jets defense did not play very well week 6 in the first meeting at the Meadowlands. But that was a Jets defense that I think is better than this one. This Jets defense has completely fallen apart since that first meeting between these teams. This is going to be a very, very difficult task for the Jets. The Bills have been an explosive offense all season long. As we know, this Jets defense, this is not the top 5 defense of 2022 and 2023. This is at best a mediocre defense. And really over the last several months, it's been one of the worst defenses in the NFL. It's just really tough to see how the Jets are going to be able to stop the Bills, especially with that. Again, I think the philosophy is going to be a lot of bend but don't break on defense. A lot of people have called Robert Saleh's defense bend but don't break the last couple of years. It really wasn't. The Jets defense was at the top of the league in getting 3 and outs in 2022 and 2023. This year's been a different story. This year, the Jets defense has both bent and broken frequently. And it's going to be a big challenge against this dynamic Buffalo Bills offense to slow them down. Now, here on the Locked On Jets podcast, we'll talk about how the Jets can win. I don't think this is a situation where the Jets can really win the game. I do think this is a situation where the Bills can lose. And with a couple of lucky breaks, who knows? Maybe the Jets can come out of Buffalo with a win. Look, I'd be lying to you if I told you I was optimistic, but there is a path to victory for the Jets. Let's talk about that as we continue here on this Friday edition of Locked On Jets. Today's episode of Locked On Jets is brought to you by Hillsdale College. Time is our most precious commodity, so don't waste it scrolling through the same mind-numbing content for hours and hours. How can you spend it wisely to improve yourself? Well, our sponsor, Hillsdale College, is offering more than 40 free, that's right, free online courses, including Constitution 101, the meaning and history of the Constitution, Introduction to Free Market Economics, The Great American Story, A Land of Hope, and the Rise and Fall of the Roman Empire. And all of Hillsdale's courses are self-paced, so you can start whenever and tune in wherever. Plus, you can go deeper with readings, quizzes, discussions, or just enjoy the lectures. Go right now to hillsdale.edu/lockedon to enroll. There's no cost and it's easy to get started. That's hillsdale.edu/lockedon to register, hillsdale.edu/lockedon. This is the Locked On Jets podcast on this Friday. The Jets head to Buffalo this weekend for a game against the Bills, a game that's important for Buffalo. I think lost in all of the commotion about the Chiefs clinching the 1 seed and locking the Bills out of getting the top seed in the bye in the AFC is the fact that if the Bills win this game, they get the 2 seed. They'll be locked into that second spot. And while the Bills can, even if the Bills lose, they still can clinch the 2 seed next weekend. This is an important game for Buffalo because winning this game allows them to rest all their starters next weekend and turn their focus to the playoffs. If Buffalo loses this game, however, they're going to have to play their starters next weekend because they will be in position to potentially lose the 2 seed if things go wrong. So they'll have to go all out next weekend against New England. They don't have to worry about that next week. I mean, they can leave the starters at Buffalo. They don't even need the starters to travel to Foxborough next weekend if they win this game, although I'm sure they will travel. Jets are purely in the role of spoiler. So how did the Jets spoil this game for Buffalo? Well, look, I think it's clear this Jets team is undermanned. This team is not as talented as Buffalo. The Bills are the better team. And not only are the Bills the better team, not only are the Bills more talented, Bills are just playing better football. This Buffalo team has been on fire, really, since that Week 6 game against the Jets. Buffalo came into that game, very easy to forget. That was a game for first place in the AFC East. If the Jets had won that game, they would have been in first place. It's tough to imagine a scenario where the Jets had a game for first place, but there it was back in October. The Bills won, and that game, in many ways, set both teams on their path this season. The Bills are Super Bowl contenders. They have a real shot to come out of the AFC this year, and the Jets, well, they have a real shot to get a top 5 pick. And it's, that's the directions these teams have gone in. So, how do the Jets win this game? Well, I think number one is Jets need to play their best game, and they need to hope the Bills come out flat. They need to hope that theory that losing the 1 seed is going to hurt them. And they need to hope that maybe Buffalo is looking past them to the playoffs because both these teams play their best game. And we haven't seen the Jets' best game all that often this season, but if both these teams play their best game, Buffalo is probably going to win. That's just the way it is. I think that all the classic ingredients for a big upset apply to this game. I think the Jets probably have to steal a possession somewhere along the line. Does that mean run a fake punt somewhere potentially? Force turnovers. If the Jets are going to play back in bend but don't break mode, that could be, that's an opportunity to force turnovers because I think that people get the concept of bend but don't break wrong. Bend but don't break means that you allow, you're willing to sacrifice 3-4 yard completions. That doesn't mean that you allow the team to drive. It doesn't necessarily mean you always want the team to drive the field, though. It doesn't always mean holding the other team to field goals. It means forcing turnovers. When you play a lot of guys back, the first guy can focus on the tackler. The second guy can go in and try and make a strip. The guy can try and punch the ball out and force a fumble. You could take more chances going for interceptions because you have a guy behind you. If you're a defensive back and you see a ball in the air, if you're the only guy, if it's just one-on-one, you might be conservative and just try and knock the ball away. If you have a guy behind you, if you have help, you might go for the interception because even if you miss it, somebody will be there to clean up the tackle and you won't give up a touchdown. So I think clearly the Jets need to force turnovers in this game. I think if the Jets don't win the turnover battle in this game, it's going to be over. And that means, again, taking some chances, trying to make a strip or two, trying to pick off a pass, going for the ball and you're going for the big play because I don't think the Jets can win this game otherwise if they don't do that. Beyond that, I think you need somebody to have a huge game. 2 weeks ago in Jacksonville, that guy was Devontae Adams. Adams just went crazy, especially in the last 4 minutes of the game, and lifted this team on his back to a victory. You'll need that type of performance. Maybe it comes from Devontae Adams. Maybe it comes from somebody else. Jets have a lot of big name players on this team. And as we know, many of the big names have not played like big names this year. But there's talent lurking in them. Even the guys who are past their prime. Even Aaron Rodgers may have a good Aaron Rodgers game left in him. We saw that 3 weeks ago in Miami where he played really well. That was a really good game from start to finish. It was Rodgers' most consistent, most complete game with the New York Jets. Over the last couple of weeks, we've seen Rodgers, at least until last week, start to get more comfortable. And I think it was a combination. Maybe he was feeling a little healthier. Maybe he was starting to trust his protection, his offensive line play. Well, both of those took a hit last week. Rodgers suffered an injury, as we know, when he took a hit against the Rams, which has been one of the stories of the season. Rodgers' body at 41 just having a tough time responding to the grind of the NFL season. But beyond that, Olu Fashanu, I think is out for the season. Now, Jets have been a little bit vague with exactly what Olu was diagnosed with last week, but you saw him leave the game and you saw him get carted off the field. Does that mean Max Mitchell starting at left tackle? That means it's going to be tougher for Rodgers to trust his protection because Max Mitchell at left tackle is not a good recipe for this football team. But the Jets have to figure out ways to manufacture big plays. Maybe that means giving Mitchell extra help. It means keeping Tyler Conklin, Jeremy Ruckert in more often. Just to make sure there's a double team nonstop, because the Jets offense, one of their biggest issues all season long is their inability to make big plays. Rodgers has not stood in the pocket enough to try to deliver the ball down the field. His arm has shown signs of deterioration. And beyond that, Breece Hall just hasn't looked like Breece Hall for most of the season. Breece Hall had a really good stretch, but he's not producing like the big 30, 40-yard runs like he did last season. Yeah, he had a good stretch in the middle part of the season where he was looking like Breece Hall again in every aspect, except there weren't the home run plays. Jets need some home run plays in this game to win. They line up against Buffalo, they're going to lose. If they just line up and it's team trading play for play, they're going to lose. Jets need this game to be kind of asymmetrical. They need to produce shocking big plays. They need to steal a possession here or there. And they need Buffalo to make mistakes. Part of this is not on the Jets. Part of this is just on the Bills need to show up and play lackadaisical football. If that happens, this could be a competitive game in the fourth quarter. And, you get a competitive game in the fourth quarter. Well, we saw one of them go the Jets way 2 weeks ago. Maybe another one can. Look, it's been a season where not a lot has gone right for the Jets in fourth quarters of games. But a lot of what happens in these fourth quarters is kind of random. And although the Jets have lost most of their close games this year, maybe one bounces their way. And if you're a fan rooting for the team, well, I guess that's what you pull for. If you're a tank commander, well, I already know what you're rooting for, and you're probably going to get your way because everything I just mentioned is a lot to ask for the New York Jets against the Buffalo Bills. And it's a lot to ask for a team going up against a team as good as the Bills. We'll see what happens, though. Anyway, that's all for today's episode. This has been the Locked On Jets podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day is our motto. As always, if you enjoy the show, hit the subscribe button where you're watching or listening so that you'll never miss an episode. If you enjoy the show and are listening on a podcast source, give it a 5-star review. And if you're watching on YouTube and enjoy the show, give this episode a big thumbs up. It helps us out, helps other Jets fans find the podcast. Enjoy your weekend. Enjoy the game. We'll be back to talk more Jets next week.